Good afternoon, everybody. And we're there. 4 days, 16 sessions, and we've made it. Well, 15 sessions. I could say we're saving the best for last, but that would be disparaging to everybody else who's been speaking. But I am really looking forward to this session. Please do let us know in the chat. That little live interaction button, click on that. You'll find the chat there. And please do tell us how many of the sessions have you done, whether it's your first, your fifth, your ninth, or your 16th. Let us know how many that you've done. Make sure that you use the chat. We will use that a lot in this session. Make sure that you put your questions in as well for Martin, and we'll make sure that Martin gets them. And there's also some polls already available in there. So click on the polls and have a look at some of the questions in there. Delighted to be able to welcome Martin to this one. I've known Martin for years, and I know he always talks good stuff, and I'm really looking forward to this session. Martin, lovely to see you, mate. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks, and thanks for having me, and well done to you and the team for your sterling effort over the last couple of weeks, and thanks for sticking around until now.
Well, no, I'm going to log off early, so I'm joking. I will hang around. I'm really looking forward to this one. Martin, over to you, mate.
Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I think my slides are going to appear. Yes, so well, thanks for being with me and us today and this last session of the Learning Technologies Autumn Forum. So I'm hoping that you're in the right place. It's all about thinking smarter, acting faster. So this is a session about critical thinking, which I think has kind of risen up the interest tree for lots of people over the last few months, especially when it comes to AI. So we're going to be looking really at a whole lot of stuff here. We've got this, if you just have a quick look at the areas that we're going to go through in the next 55 minutes, all of the stuff that I'm talking about, I'm presuming we're going to be sharing these slides. Happy to talk to people offline about this because there's quite a lot of stuff to go through. And this is about individual critical thinking, like what you can do, but also it's about teams and colleagues as well. So it'll be interactive. We've got some polls, and so it'd be great to get your input onto some of the issues that I'll be talking about. And also we're going to do, I've got some practical stuff that I'd like to share with you towards the end. And I know that Andrew is also, he's kind of stage left. So I know he's going to come in at some point because we might like to do a little bit of discussion on the polls. So I'm going to very briefly describe who I am, because I'm just, you might just be thinking, well, all right, I know Andrew, been working in and around L&D for 20 years or so, but actually, who am I to be talking about this subject? So I've tried to give a sort of visual profile of myself here, and there's a couple of things that I would point to in this. So my background is journalism. So for me, it was always about trying to get to the truth of things. So lots of fact checking, interviewing people, listening. So that's kind of really been at the heart of my work ever since, actually. So I was in B2B publishing, and when I was in that environment, I did some peer networking work as well. So I started to do what you might want to call shadow L&D as well. But I also worked in a lot of HR talent and learning publications. So that's where I sort of started. And from that, I've had this interest in research and collaboration, and I was involved in sort of networks or L&D Connect, if anyone can remember that from a long time ago. So when I look at this, the background here, it's very focused on learning and talent, but also a lot of this is about innovation and stepping into the new. And I think that's really what this is all about. So I don't think anyone here today needs to be told about the challenges that we all face, but I think it's quite important to, really kind of connect with the fact that as an industry, we've got to deal with quite a lot of challenges. We really are trying to step into new ground, I think, very much driven by technology. But also we've got a load of other, people talk about the poly crisis, sustainability, economic challenges. And I think that's all hard enough. But on top of that, we've also got information overload, and that's just got worse and worse and worse over the last few years, because we can just create it so easily. Whether it's true or not is highly debatable most of the time. And, so we face feeds of information that basically make it quite hard to make decisions and think critically and come up with some good decisions. So we're going to look firstly at critical thinking. Now, I know that's quite a long quote, but I'll let you digest that. Basically, if we were to really boil that down, we're looking at a cognitive process, really, which is one that helps you decide what you're thinking, what you believe, and what you do. Now, that quote is from a group of 50 experts, like scholars, educators, and researchers into critical thinking. So, and I thought what was quite interesting about it is the last line. Well, I think it's all very interesting, but the last line is essential as a tool of inquiry, problem solving, decision making, and learning. And I think that is hugely important for us today. It's, this is why people are talking about this skill, because we really need to be able to take ourselves into these kind of this new environment that is kind of emerging around us at the moment, or slowly, but it's soon to, I think. So how can we do that? And I think this is a tool, a skill, if you like, that's going to help us make much better decisions as we step into that. So there's a poll, and I don't know if the first one was, when was the last time you made a quick decision that didn't quite work? Now, can I give you just 30 seconds to answer that if you haven't already done so? And I'm going to bring Andrew in just to, in a minute, just to see what everyone says in answer to that poll. And I'll explain while I'm asking it in a minute.
Always helps if I remember to put my camera on.
So come on then.
Yeah, ask the question again.
So,
Martin, so people can pick it up.
Yeah, so the question is, when was the last time you made a quick decision that didn't quite work?
So we've got a few people have answered. Interestingly, over half the group have said in the past month.
Okay.
Third of people earlier this week, and then the remaining 13-14% a while ago, but I still remember it. I never make bad decisions. I'd love to know who you are. That one person, I think it is, who's responded to that. We've had 30 votes, and one person, 3%, has said, I never make bad decisions. Name who you are. I would be keen to find out, and prefer not to say. I think it's interesting, the framing of the question, because you say a quick decision, and it's the quick is so subjective. So one person's quick is another person's meandering. A quick decision for one person might be immediate, whereas for somebody else it might be, half a day. And we know people who agonize over a day or longer writing emails. So interesting to see the responses.
Yeah, and thanks everyone. I'm not trying to just be, kind of provocative for the sake of it. What I'm trying to get at is this idea of A, it's easy to make decisions quickly. B, it's easy to make them and they might not give you the result that you wanted. And I think, this idea of being impulsive is quite important. And I think we need to think about that now because of the world in which we live. And I'll come on to that, because I think there are lots of reasons that for the way things are done in terms of information, if you like, is all about hooking us into making impulsive decisions, and I think we have to be very aware of that. So I think it's just easy to make fairly quick decisions that don't necessarily give you the answer that you want, but it's just worth thinking about the fact that does happen for us.
Apart from the one person in the room.
Well, yeah, and I think it's fantastic. Whoever you are, you probably can teach me quite a few lessons, but the one thing I would ask then is, we're going to come on to this a bit further, a bit later on, about the special tool that we have in organisations that puts this in steroids into this process, which is groupthink. So let's see what the answer is when it comes to that, because I think as an individual we can be good at this stuff, but it can be a lot harder for that to work when you're in a workplace or with a group of people who might be thinking other things. Excellent, thank you.
Just to add, Rachel says, I have a 3-year-old, so he would tell me every decision that I make is wrong. Liz Beasley said teenagers are good for that view as well. Hanneke said, if it wasn't me, but to throw in a quote, I never lose, I either win or learn, which I love that, Hanneke. So again, the critical thinking part.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting, because I share your pain as a parent, and what I find quite interesting is that my eldest is at university doing philosophy, and of course he's looking at critical thinking. The irony is just unbelievable. So it's really has come full circle for me. So thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts there. I'm going to move on and have a quick look at some examples of why we need to be thinking critically. Now, I don't want to spend. I think everyone here today, especially if you're in learning or talent or HR, you know why this is important, and I think that it's why lots of people are looking at this as a skill that's increasingly important for the workforce. But I'll give you some examples of the things that we need to be thinking about. So there's a headline here: how people are really using generative AI in 2025. Now, that's a bit of research by Mark Zell-Sanders from Filtered, and it's got a lovely graphic, and the answer is therapy and companionship. That's the number one way people are using generative AI. Now, what's interesting about that piece of research is that it was published in Harvard Business Review. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that publication, but it's a big brand, and it's read a lot by people at work, in business. And if you get something published in there, it gets amplified a lot. So this particular story was amplified a lot, lots of headlines around it. And I thought, that's interesting. I thought what was more interesting was when ChatGPT, obviously one of the generative AI tools that we're talking about there, did some research of 1 million conversations, and it was interesting. It actually names that Mark's research in it. You can see the quote there. It said that only 1.9% of those messages were about relationships and personal reflection. Most of the stuff was to do with decision making and other elements, but it wasn't relationships and personal reflection, if you like. So I'm just sharing that because it's like, wow, that's interesting. This is, what picture is emerging about how we're using that tool. The headlines can be very different. The research can be conflicting. One story can be really promoted through a platform that gets a lot of reach, and you might think that's the answer, but I think that's so that was interesting. The second one, which I thought was intriguing, was Miles Runham, who is an analyst at Fosway Group. It's like a learning HR technology analyst group, has posed that question there about what is learning in the flow of work, and I think just thinking, why is that being asked right now? Because the reason I'm asking that is because it's just, if you work in learning, you'll notice that working in the flow of work, learning in the flow of work rather, is a big thing. People talk about it all the time. And here we have someone who's a really experienced practitioner, now an analyst, posing the question, well, what is it? And there were loads of, when I took that screenshot, there were 70, nearly 80 responses. It kind of promoted quite a big, provoked quite a lot of conversation. But it says to me that it's unclear. So I've got another poll question, just because I need to sense check my thinking. So I've got two questions. And the first one is, do you believe learning in the flow of work is a useful term? And there are plenty of, while you're answering that, I will just say there are plenty of examples like this. There was another one that I heard. Radio 4 had a program. It was a news story, and it was all about Reed, the recruitment agency, talking about there's a 65% drop in graduate level jobs. And then I saw the CEO of the Association of Graduate Careers Advisory Services, who also have loads of data from job boards, university job boards, saying that there was a 7.5% drop. And Martin Edmondson, CEO of that association, said this sort of messaging can cause panic and stress unnecessarily. It can really shape things. If you think that grad jobs have just fallen off a cliff, you can imagine what that's saying to graduates, what are potential undergraduates, etc., etc. So again, it's just these examples of research being used in certain ways, amplified massively, but it may not be as it seems. So that's why we need to have these skills, basically. So Andrew, we've had this one poll question: do you believe learning in the flow of work is a useful term? There was also a second one, which was, and are you completely clear what learning in the flow of work means? So
fascinating responses. So, do you believe learning in the flow of work is a useful term? 68% of people say yes. Okay. 2% not sure. Oh, sorry, 2% no, and 32% not sure. Interestingly, it's when you started talking about learning in the flow of work, that's when the no response appeared. What I think is fascinating is we saying, yes, we think it's a useful term. However, are you completely clear what learning in the flow of work means? Over half the people say no.
All right.
So 2/3 people think it's really useful, but the same group of people, half of them don't understand necessarily what it means, which I think is a really interesting challenge. What I think is interesting, particularly around this particular word. So it was Jay Cross who first talked about learning in the flow of work, and we're talking, 25, 28 years ago. I think it's really interesting that it's been, picked up by other people, who are now talking about it, and people non-station go, yes, learning in the flow of work kind of thing. When actually there's a fundamental challenge there, which I think you positioned beautifully, is are we thinking critically about what that means? So I go back to the critical thought part. And secondly, if that was to happen, our learning functions have to be very, very different. And I think that there's a tension between learning done within the organization and learning done in the flow of work. And there was a comment, you put a great post up on LinkedIn, which I responded to the other week, about shadow L&D, which I think is fabulous thinking, because I don't think we're entirely comfortable with learning in the flow of work. I love the responses. If it's 49.51 now, there we go. We're not quite half. 49.51 say, are you completely clear what it means? And is it a useful term? That stayed as it is. 69% yes, 2% no, and 29%, almost 30% not sure.
So I think what I'm enjoying, Andrew, and thank you for coming on and sharing the results, is also your perspective on it, actually, because I think you really hit the nail on the head there. I think it's I'm asking these questions because I think the implications around the answers are significant, as you say. And I would add another thing in the mix there, which is this is what the vendor community is talking about a lot. So basically, L&D, the L&D industry has a very marketing-driven information flow, if you like. So there's a lot of white papers, a lot of stuff being pushed out by vendors. And if they're talking about learning in the flow of work as a thing as well, that just adds into the mix of, well, actually, for me, is it useful to be able to step back and say, well, what is that exactly? And the reason I say that is because I don't know if anyone was on David Wilson's session this morning, but I tuned in for a bit. I thought it was absolutely amazing, not surprising, but amazing that he was looking at the learning systems market, and actually, their research has shown that 10% of the AI functionality that's being promised by vendors is actually live to their customers currently. Now, you might say that's not surprising because it's relatively new, but just think about the hype in the market. It's a massive bubble right now. And actually, it's a lot easier to talk about the hype than it is to talk about the fact that, well, it's really very small. There's hardly any measurable impact of what this technology is doing. But actually over here, we're saying this is it, this is where we're going. And it might well be, but actually, I think, does it serve us well to think about the fact that there isn't that much evidence of impact apart from doing content creation? I'm talking about business impact here. I'm not talking about impacts on the learning function. So I think
I'm just going to add mine. Notwithstanding the impact, what I thought was really interesting was if you look through all of the other functions on David's session, if you didn't see it, don't worry, you can go back, you can pick it out from the program. Have a look through David's session. When you get to that point there, you'll actually see this is what we're using AI for, which is effectively personalizing, which is where we wanted to be doing it. But then you look at all the other things that it says it can do. I made a comment in the chat, which I think is really interesting, is that you don't need a bespoke learning management or learning platform to do that. Pretty much B2C platforms will do that for you anyway. I mean, I did it myself, earlier on this morning. Somebody sent me a document and I just wanted to prove to them, well, do you know what? Let me take that document, stick it in Notebook LM and turn it into a 7-minute video, which effectively describes everything that they want to happen through this document. Completely blew their minds that you could do this, with this tool that's a non-vendor tool.
Yeah. And I think this, so thank you for everyone for just answering honestly, because I think this is our reality, right? This is what I'm trying to get across today. It's about this ability to hold information and make good decisions out of the information that we gather. So what are we looking for and how do we make those decisions? The reason I think it's really important now is because things are changing rapidly. And I think that's a really good point that Andrew just made. Actually, I'm not saying that this means that we shouldn't be investing in learning technologies, but it's an interesting one when you actually go through a process that provides you with evidence that the use case could be fulfilled by a different type of technology. And what does that then mean? I think it's the process that gets you to that. And I think that's why this stuff is incredibly important right now. So moving on, I'm now going to, this really is me talking to learning professionals about this stuff is, you know it, but I'm going to tell you again because it's really important, and it comes back to some of this idea of, not just impulsive decision making, but I think the way the world we live in terms of our information world, I think this stuff is really important, right? So Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winning psychologist, did kind of set the foundations for behavioral sort of economics, and his book Thinking Fast and Slow, that came out over 10 years ago. And he identified these kind of two thinking systems, which you can see there. One's quite impulsive and one's a lot more reflective. So the fast one is, intuitive and driven by emotion and habit. And I want to come back to that in a sec. Fast but error prone. And by the way, this isn't about one is good and one is bad. It's about the fact that we have two of them, and it's how we use them together, which is actually what really matters here. And then there's the slow thinking one. Now, the emotion is really the fast thinking bit, driven by emotion and habit. I think that's really interesting for all of us now, because of the way information is delivered to us, right? So what do we get in information a lot of the time right now? It's basically clickbait type information. It drives an emotional response, but that could be quite problematic if you have that response immediately to something. Then that can already sort of fog and cloud kind of what you're thinking, and yet that's a lot of what is being pushed a lot of the time. I'm only saying this from a journalistic point of view as well. I mean, it's all about storytelling, and it's about first person, and it's about really hooking people in. And even if it's kind of more business to business information, there's a lot of that going on, and you can respond emotionally in a more impulsive way. And the thing about that is, and I'll come on to the next slide about this, is it kind of feeds into your biases and can reinforce things. So we kind of want a balance. We want to be able to do more slow thinking here, but we need to be very aware of our fast thinking brain, and we need our fast thinking brain to make decisions quickly a lot of the time. But when it comes to critical thinking, we need to really think a bit more slowly about being more deliberate and analytical, for example. So I've put in the resources today a list of there are a lot of biases and heuristics, right? So these are basically heuristics are like shortcuts that your brain uses to kind of cut through the information that it's kind of blasted at it all the time. And then there's the biases, the things that we basically there are cultural norms, all sorts of things that affect that, stereotypes. We're making sense of the world through some of these kind of biases that I've listed here. But I've listed a few because I think these five I think are sort of at play quite a lot when it comes to information and kind of making sense of it. So the confirmation, tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe. I mean, I don't know what you think. It's really, really easy to do that, to just find stuff that confirms what we think. The availability heuristic, you're judging the likelihood of events based on how easy examples come to mind. Oh yeah, I get that. I can think of an example of that thing, so that makes sense to me. Agree with that. Relying too heavily on the first piece of information encountered, that's easily done. Adopting beliefs or behaviors because many other people do. As an industry, I think it's quite interesting. Look at the learning in the flow of work. It's massively adopted as a term, but as those poll results suggest, it's a useful term, but we don't quite know what it means. And I think, we need to know what it means. And also overconfidence, we can see that, especially in groups, which can be quite problematic as well. But I think that idea of confirmation bias is made worse by the kind of world that we live in, because we have because of the algorithms in pretty much all platforms now that kind of provide information. It's very easy to see the things that the signals that the algorithms look out for is what you've looked at before a lot of the time, and what you've commented on, etc. And it's basically that will drive what you see. So that these biases are, kind of reinforced a lot because you're not getting a broader view of information. You have to really work hard to get out of your rabbit holes that are provided for you by all the platforms that you're accessing information on. So what you tend to get is like an inch wide, mile deep view of something, and down that rabbit hole can be a really unhealthy place to be sometimes. So I was just going to say, I've got something for you in chat actually. Which one of these kind of biases shows up most in your team's decisions, do you think? Do they tend to seek out information that they already know? Do they base judgments on stuff they've, examples that they've done before, or they're very well aware of? Is any of this at play in the decisions that your team makes?
The chat has been on fire up to this point, Martin. So thank you for that.
Oh no, sorry. I can't
no,
see.
in a good way.
So I'm slightly
in a good way.
concerned.
No, it's in a good way. Some of the stuff, I mean, to some of the comments, Colin said overconfidence, bias, delusions of adequacy. And Dan Roddy has said, I'm supremely sure I'm guilty of overconfidence bias, but now I'm not so sure. Obviously, two guys making bad dag jokes. Rachel Ratcliffe, though, said anchoring bias, not critiquing outputs, AI outputs, and taking them at face value, which I think is a really interesting one. And I think that's a brilliant point, Rachel. Yeah. I think that's a really brilliant point. Davina says they make judgments on anchoring bias. Dan says, I think groups are most likely to build their own bandwagons and then leap on for the ride, which I think is a really interesting point as well. Interesting, just looking at those biases. I mentioned two. I've been looking at bias as part of the evaluation work, and that for me, it's the availability heuristic is the key one. We don't want to go looking for data when we can hand out a happy sheet, and that's the data available to us. We can see who attended, who didn't attend. We've got all that availability data, so that's what we report. That's the one I see most. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. So also, I'd quickly say hello to Dan because it's nice to see you here, Dan. sorry, I'm sort of a bit focused on the talking and not enough on the conversation. And it's all about the conversation.
I'll farm the chat, mate. Don't worry. I'll farm the chat. You just do what you do, and the chat is getting farmed.
But I think what I'm getting from this is there is people can recognize this stuff, right? And the point is, it's really powerful. And we have what's it like a sunk cost fallacy? I think it is. Yeah. We have. That's when you're the person that spent £50,000 deploying a system, and you're going to continue to maintain it's going to work for this organization, whether it works or not, right? Because you have been brought in to put it in and it hasn't worked. And that's a really difficult place to be, but people defend that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And I think right now we've got this situation where we've got a real game-changing technology. So when I come back to that first slide about when I was doing my background, when I was doing the peer-to-peer stuff, it was when, basically it was just after 2000. So it was the first sort of tech revolution, if you like, dot-com bubble and all that. But I was working in a media company. We're going from print to online really quickly. It really matters to be able to step into that new kind of world of we had to learn new skills, use new technologies, and do it really rapidly. And at that point, it's not the time to be holding on to the legacy stuff. But there's a huge investment in it. So I think this stuff is really, really important. I think for me, it's about recognizing it. And I think and it's the same for every individual in the organization and every team. This is not a learning thing. This is just being able to understand that we have some of these biases towards certain bits of information or ways of thinking, and maybe we can be a bit more critical about that.
So you raised a really interesting point then, because you were talking about sunk cost fallacy, and we tend to think of it in terms of physical. So we have training rooms, so we have to fill them. We have LMSs. What about the sunk cost of doing all that time, energy, and investment in our development, which is now no longer required? And we had this when I worked in the fire service. Firefighters, their job was to, cut people out of cars and squirt water on fire. Now, all of a sudden, that's not what the job of a firefighter does. The job of a firefighter is to stop fires happening in the first place. So we're in a very different place now.
Yeah.
And why have we invested all that time, energy, and effort into it? And I think there's something around what we've done in learning and development and developed ourselves. And we have all of these amazing instructional design skills and so on. But, do we need them anymore? Well, actually, maybe we don't. And I think there's something to do with sunk costs and that, confirmation bias piece around, well, no, this is the way we do it. Actually, the world's moved. There's been a shift.
Yeah, I think, these are not insignificant things, right? So I don't underestimate, and I really what I think my aim of today was to get us thinking about this stuff rather than to put a light of fire under L&D. That's not, because I think there's also a danger of not understanding what really needs to be kept, as well as what might need to be changed or discarded. I think we have to, that's why you need these skills, because you need to evaluate everything, so you do know a lot about what's worked and what hasn't. That's really important. That's a data point. If it's not working, that's you might feel invested in it, but it's also a data point, which is saying, actually, we've tried this and we've got a lot of evidence to suggest it doesn't work. For me, the issue is how L&D can position itself with those kind of arguments and compelling cases to get heard and influence higher up the chain. So that's really, because learning is the one lever every organization has to innovate. It's stepping into the new. And I think, and it saddens me to think that people are really not getting the voice in the organization to be able to, present it as that lever of innovation, because it is. So maybe some of this stuff will help with that. So should we move on, Andrew? That's great.
Yeah, we're 35 minutes down so far. So yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I bet I'll groove on. So the thing about what I was saying earlier is, it's like, this is the superpower that really is really concerning. It basically amplifies poor decision making and a lot of bias, right? And it does really flourish in a lot of organizations, a lot of cultures, especially ones, I think, where there's certain types of leadership and certain lack of psychological safety as well. Now, I've got this, I've put a link in the references to some of this stuff. There are 8 or 9 characteristics of groupthink, which I should have probably put on a slide, actually, because I'm going to have to kind of just quickly go through them because I think they're quite important. So some of the characteristics, right, of groupthink, and this is really important because this is, I think, the working context. Not only is it about individuals, it's very much about teams, really important unit of the organization. And I think they will become increasingly the focus of attention from learning, and from an organizational development perspective. It's how teams work together. So, illusion of invulnerability. The group believes it's invincible or immune to mistakes. Collective rationalization. You downplay the warnings and justify the decisions, even when the evidence suggests there's a problem. I think it's quite this inherent morality, a belief in that. So actually, if your cause is morally right, we don't have to question it. and that can be quite powerful in certain types of organizations, actually. Stereotyping outsiders, those who criticize or oppose the thinking are kind of ostracized. I put my hand up to that because I've had that more than once in a corporate setting. Self-censorship. Now, I think that I've seen a lot. I don't know about everyone here today, but that idea of, there are people that have got great ideas in a team and they go into those meetings and they don't say anything. And that's a massive problem. Illusion of unanimity. So following on from that, silence is agreement for a lot of teams. And then there's direct pressure on dissenters. If you voice disagreement, you're probably there's probably pressure on you to conform at some point. And also some people are gatekeepers of the information that team actually shares. So they might not put in information that might be counter to what the team wants to achieve or, it believes or thinks. So, and I think, I don't know, but I haven't looked at the chat, but I'm presuming you've probably all been in teams like that. You might be in them now. They're at different levels of the organization. I think leadership style, stress and pressure are really, they really impact on this stuff. And that, of course, is exactly what we're experiencing a lot more of now. So if you've got quite command and control type organization or teams that are run in that way, then really you're probably going to have quite a lot of this. But I think that stress and pressure to make good decisions quickly can also lead us into these kind of behaviours. So it's hard. But then you think about where it's been utterly disastrous. If you look at, and I was looking at, is it Matthew Said's book, Rebel Ideas? It's those kinds of books are littered with stories of, failure based on groupthink, basically. One of them, a big one, was Lehman Brothers in 2008 financial crisis. The kind of the analysis of that was that groupthink at a senior level really enabled that bank to just walk over the cliff and just to carry on in a way that it should never have been allowed to. They suppressed dissent and they overestimated their risk-taking strategies. And guess what? They just caused an absolutely massive financial global crisis. So thank you to them for that. But that's groupthink at its worst, I think. Right, I've got another poll question. So I'm going to ask this. So what's harder for you, questioning yourself or questioning the group? I'll say that again. What's harder for you, questioning yourself or questioning the group? And when they say questioning yourself, it's about questioning your own assumptions versus questioning the team's kind of consensus, if you like. So I'll let you answer that quickly. Yeah, I think, Andrew, how are we looking on that?
Cool.
It's hard to do both. I think it's just hard, right? So what do the results say?
So it's a pretty split. So 28% questioning my own assumptions, 28% questioning the team, 33% both are tough, 10% neither. Challenge is welcome here.
That's good. So basically, so thank you everyone, and thanks Andrew. I think that the issue for me is what I'm trying to flag up. We need to be able to do both right now. There are lots of challenges that we need to do. We need to think about our own assumptions, and we need to think about the assumptions that are very live within teams. And it's hard to do that. You have to be quite brave to put your hand up and start bringing a different perspective, but it is needed. So I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to quickly look. It's a horizontal traffic light. Yeah, you do get them in some countries, but basically, so what I'm going to do here is just I've got a couple of slides that just look at how we can get to better decision making and how we can use technology to do that. So I did put a question in the poll, which was, when a new AI tool appears, what's your default? Red, amber, or green? So red 69, amber 19. I'm not sure what green was. So the red really is pausing. So what the idea of this model is basically, how can we be more critical? How can we bring some healthy skepticism to all the information that we're basically is bombarding us? So most people are in the amber light area, which is great. That's exploration. So pausing is really the first thing you need to do. I think it's, there's a lot of pressure. Like everyone, I'm presuming today, is under quite a lot of pressure to be exploring what AI can do for them in their role or in their team, in their function, in their organization. That might be one example. So you've got this time pressure, and it's very easy to jump to action. But you really don't want to be doing that, because it's quite easy to make the wrong decision. So this is kind of pace, really. And I think, so being able to pause and then look at all the different, and I'll just talk about this in a minute, holding opposing views, for example, and going in search of information that's going to help you start to think about whatever it is you need to make a decision on. Start with that, then explore. And exploring can take quite some time, but luckily we can use AI for this, I think. And then action. We need to turn stuff into sort of low risk experiments. Now, coming back to what I talked about earlier with Miles Runham at Fossway, I think he was very much doing the amber bit. He's asking a question about learning in the flow of work, and he's looking for evidence. I don't know what he'll do with 80 comments plus. He's obviously going to be doing something with that. It's obviously, I don't know what the action will be, but he's really shaping his thinking. So I think, at that point, you're exploring and reflecting. It's a really important stage. I'm going to quickly jump through this, as we haven't got a lot of time, and then I think the next bit's more interesting and better. But when we're talking about thinking critically, we're talking about being able to hold opposing ideas and resisting the urge to choose too quickly between them. I think that is our reality at the moment, is that it's all about speed, and we have to be quite careful in how we hold that information, because we need to be able to do that. But I think we can use AI as it's a tool. It's something that we can use. And so I've been playing around, and I just wanted to share some of this with you. And please do share other things that you might be doing yourselves. But actually, I know there's a lot of research that says, yeah, we're using AI for critical thinking. So my concern with that is, every time I speak to ChatGPT in a certain kind of way, it just says, oh, Martin, that's great. Everything I say is great. It's really nice, actually. I like talking to my GPT, because it's really nice back to me. It's very appreciative, always very helpful at the end. But actually, that's not what I need when I'm trying to actually think more critically about something. So what you want to do is set up your Gen AI tool of choice to be able to kind of give you some of that. So my 4 areas are critical friend, about assumptions. Evidence filter, using research to be able to give me something back about what supports claims, what challenges is it. Counterfactual, basically giving you the opposite view. And then the experimental one, where we're actually looking at turning all the information we've pulled together and turning that into something that we can act on. So to do this quite quickly. So I'm hoping you can see that. These are the prompts that I use. And there, you know, if you're a very advanced user of generative AI tools, then you might do your own GPT. What I wanted to do was kind of do what I think are, even at this level of prompt, it gives me quite a lot of really useful information to help me think critically, right? And what I don't do is take everything verbatim and then just spew it out saying that's my view. This is about helping individuals and teams get to a better place with their thinking, right? So it's about getting a 360-degree view of that thing that you're working on quite quickly, and you're asking for criticism. So, you know, you can do this with pretty much all your work, and you might be doing this already. But for me, like, the evidence filter was quite interesting. So I've got an example, which was, I don't know if anyone saw this, there was an MIT report, and the headline around the report was 95% of Gen AI projects fail. So I put the research into that GPT, into that prompt, and basically it says, and I thought this is quite interesting, failure in this study doesn't necessarily mean projects were cancelled or didn't work. It means they failed to produce measurable business impact. And it goes on to say the report's message isn't AI doesn't work, it's that most organizations don't yet know how to make it work. So that's quite interesting, because it's just given me a completely different view of what that research was saying. Now, obviously, I need to check that myself, because I do in my work. But very quickly, I'm beginning to start thinking about the other side of the coin, if you like. And I think this is where AI is really, really helpful. I think it's just, not using the tool to basically give you the answers and give you what you want to hear and go back into those biases. It's not that. It's actually really intentionally trying to find the opposite and trying to really uncover different angles on what you're thinking about, and then getting it to a use case, like test it out. So I hope that makes sense. I don't know what, Andrew, I know we've got a few minutes left. Is anyone, would you like to join me back again on the stage, just to see
just
what's all landing?
we're all back on again. Yeah, I was wandering from behind a curtain. Yeah, the fabulous conversations about the quality of the responses that people are getting from their AI tools. So
Yeah.
Rachel said some AI will gaslight you into oblivion and then tell you, and when you tell it it's wrong, it will wholeheartedly agree with you. So there's some interesting stuff around that.
Yeah.
Michelle Kay, she noticed that her co-pilot was, thanks for pointing that out, great point, etc., kind of thing, and being positive. I mentioned in the chat, that I have, my own, I've got Andrew mode on, my AI tools, and they know that when I suggest Andrew mode, they have to, the tools have to respond in a certain way, and and so on around it. Catherine Chapman's picked up a really interesting point, which I think is really valid, which is governance is required before adoption. And I think there's a really interesting place we're in right now, with organizations nervous as to who can authorize or approve, is what Catherine said.
Yeah.
I think we're in the bring your own AI space, similar to bring your own device, mobile phones and stuff, 20 years ago. And I think that genie is out the bottle, the Pandora's box being open, choose your analogy, but people will continue to use their own AI tools. And I think there's something really interesting around how organizations are going to work with these AI tools. And if your organization isn't using them, your employees are, And I think there's an interesting conversation to be held there around what that governance needs to look like in the future.
Yeah, but I think also just don't forget about, where we're trying to get to with the skill of critical thinking, right? So what are the inputs? And the input maybe should be what is going on in teams now with tools, and how are people, using, and what are they using, and how are they using it? Because the thing is, innovation, for example, and don't forget, this is the way I'm framing critical thinking. It's happening all the time. And I think maybe it's for a function like learning to firstly understand what that looks like, because people are just doing it in every day in their work. Where they're doing it right, using the right tools in the right way, that's a massively important issue. But I think from a critical thinking perspective, I don't think it's good enough for an organization to say, for IT to go, right, these are the guardrails, you can only use this tool, and that's it. That's just absolutely going to cut off innovation just like that. This is about people. The thing is, this isn't just about critical thinking for learning teams. Just imagine if everyone in the organization is thinking in this way. That's the point. It's like, where does that go? Because then you really will have quite different conversations, I think. But I think what I'm trying to say is, I think AI enables us to really interrogate data a lot more quickly than we've ever been able to. And I think we should use that opportunity to, kind of help us with the process of thinking more critically. I'm not saying that it's not the answer. As to your point about some of the comments, I think that humans are really lazy. It's really a problem, because it's a tough one to sell. I'm talking about doing something that takes more cognitive energy, takes more time, but you will get to something that's a better result. That's that's a tough sell, because everyone wants to do things.
Rachel picked this up earlier. So Rachel Ratcliffe, she picked this up earlier on, about 15 minutes in. She actually asked the question. It's beautifully come around to it, to this question, which a load of people have upvoted, which is, how can we teach critical thinking as an applicable skill other than by trial and error and learning the hard way what the outcome should look like and shouldn't look like? When AI removes entry-level tasks, that often leads to the development of experience, which is, we've seen this happen. An example, as an experienced professional, I now want a summary of a series of documents should contain, but an inexperienced employee wouldn't do, and they might rely too heavily on that AI output. How do you train the individual on the critical thinking skills that they need when they're moving into an organization where critical thinking has been put aside? I love the question, Rachel. I love that we've come back around to it, right at the end of the session.
But I think what I would say is, think about your data inputs, right? I think it's really interesting when you've got many generations in the organization. We're talking about things like tacit knowledge, right? So that's like the holy grail for L&D, or has been. And this is a way to do it. Critical thinking is about getting a team of people together and really being able to understand what we're talking about here, and then use the inputs. It's like, so what do we know? What do we need to know? What don't we know? And what do we need to find out? These are I think that's a really good way of engaging with current work, current state, to enable you to take into move into a future state. But I think my concern would be critical thinking models, and it's a separate thing. I think it makes a lot more sense for this work to be done in work right now on the back of AI, because I think people are using it for critical thinking, but probably not as effectively as they might be able to. So I think it's a great point, though. But I think it should be used to actually get that sort of tacit knowledge on the table, part of the mix. People learn from each other at that point. They move. There's a lot in it that makes it, I think, quite appealing, really. Sorry,
we are almost at time.
We are, aren't we?
We are almost at time.
So I mean, I've pretty much come to an end, right? I've got a questions slide, which is, but we've kind of been having questions, and I've also got another slide about what I mean, I do some coaching around this sort of stuff, so you know, that's another thing, but that's but for me, I think this conversation's been fantastic, actually. So I hope everyone has found it useful. That's my last thank you slide. There you go. But it's, you know, I think it's a really big topic, and rightly so. And I think we can use the technology as a part of the mix, basically, in a way that it hasn't been in the past. So we now have an interrogatory type of relationship with a tool, in a way that maybe you could do it with Google, but you know, kind of not as effectively.
Fabulous. Awesome conversation. Yes, it has been a brilliant conversation, because you know what, these sessions always work best when it's a conversation not between, you know, me and you, or you and whoever's chairing, but with you, the person presenting, and the audience. And this has felt really much like that. I love the chat, and you're going to go back and just relook at the chat again, and I would strongly suggest you do so. Martin, thank you very much indeed. If people want to connect with you through LinkedIn, and your email address is on there as well. Really great session. I mean, Michelle's just said great session, wonderful chat, and a great way to end it. Thank you, everyone, which I think is the nicest way to frame it. Thank you, everybody. Really, really good fun chatting with you, Martin, and I appreciate it. Really good thank you to everybody who's attended. As I always say, these sessions only help and only come to life when we have an audience who are participating. So everybody who's participated in this session, any of the previous sessions, fabulous. Thank you for your time, your energy, and your effort. All of the sessions are available online, and you will be able to see them online. Again, go back through the comments and questions and so on as well. I'm going to have to, because I know there's people who've asked me questions that I've not seen. If you want to connect with me, you'll find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm more than happy to have a chat around that. But thank you again, Martin. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And that's the end of Learning Technologies Autumn Forum for 2025. Hopefully, we'll be back again next year, and we'll see you again then. If not, we'll see you at Learning Technologies in April at the Excel Centre. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. And we're done.